I am your presenter, Joseph Crable. I am a mobile solutions architect here at Portable Technology Solutions. What we're going to be talking about today is sending email from TracerPlus. You can also do SMS, but we're primarily going to focus on email today. Before we get started, I just want to mention that if you do happen to have questions during the webinar, please type them into the question panel, and we will address all questions at the end of the webinar, time permitting. So what I want to do today is enable a TracerPlus session for email and show you how easy that is. I'm actually going to download a sample project from one of our online apps and add email to it. Then we'll basically send an email as is using one of our samples. We'll then actually take that email format and customize it to show you how you can actually change an email format and how that would present to the user in an email. And then I'm going to show you an advanced email format to show you what's possible with sending email and the type of data that you can actually send. Okay, so I'm just going to close my PowerPoint here. So what you're looking at here is our TracerPlus desktop tool. For those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a free tool that you can develop and design applications and push them out to a variety of different mobile devices, tablets, and smartphones. So what I'm going to do is grab a sample from our Online Solutions Center. So I'm going to grab an electrical meter reading app. Okay, so now that we have that downloaded, we can actually view some of the settings. So if I click on the meter reading app and we look at the form, the goal of this is to actually picture someone going from house to house or building to building, scanning meters, pulling up information about them, and then updating those meters with a current reading, as well as any notes. They can also take a photo of that meter for proof of the read. So what we want to do here is send an email after each submit. So in order to do that, we have a Messaging Settings tab. So if we come over to Messaging, we go ahead and click the Enable Messaging. Now that's going to enable this session to actually send emails or text messages. So if we talk about some of the settings first here, you have your report. This is going to be the actual format or the layout of the report that you're going to send, or the email. This is going to control what gets sent in the email as well as how it's going to look. But we'll actually dive into modifying that report after I show you our sample here. The next thing you can choose is what to send. So you can send the current record, you can send all records, or you can actually prompt for a filter. So if you were entering a mobile order, you could actually send data that were only tied to a specific order. We have a few checkboxes here. One is a Send on Submit. So this would allow us to send the email once we submit a record on the device. So in order to do this, we actually have to create a valid filter to actually send that data. So currently, we don't have anything that would actually filter that properly. So what I'm going to do is add a field to our session here. We'll call it Send Email. And we'll leave that field blank. And if we jump back over to messaging, we can now set that here. So if field send email equals blank or null, then on submit, it's going to send that email. The send message automatically, I'll explain that a little bit later after we actually send the message. So if we jump down to our actual message account settings, you'll see that we can select a type here of email or text. If we do select text, you'll notice that some fields actually gray out, as some of those aren't necessary for text where they would be for email. So if we switch that back to email, the first thing we need to do is specify a sender account. So what the sender account is going to do is basically tell the device what email account it should use. So I have email set up on my device here. You'll see the Outlook email. This is actually connected to Microsoft Exchange. So because of that, that uses Microsoft's Windows Mobile Device Center or ActiveSync. So that's actually the name of the email account we have to specify when using Exchange. So we would call that ActiveSync. If you were using something like Gmail or Yahoo, that sender account would probably vary and would actually be the name that you gave it on your device. So now we can define the recipients of this email. So let's say whenever we inspect a meter, we want to send an email back to the office. So I'll just put my email here. So every time we submit this record, it's going to send an email to this address. Now we can also set a subject of this email. So maybe we want to call it new meter read. Okay, so we fully defined our setup here. The only thing we want to do is choose a report. So if we look on our report drop-down, I'm just going to choose our email sample. This is a sample that we actually include by default. It's a simple 10-field email report. You know, it's not customized in any way, but shows you how the actual process works. So now that I've configured all my email settings, I'm going to deploy this out to my device. I'm using a Windows mobile device today, but you can also use any Android device version 2.2 and up. So once I deploy that to my device, we see our two sessions here. We have our meter reading and our meter list. So if we jump over to meter reading, you'll see at first if we were to enter a meter here that nothing would be found. So what we want to actually do is I'm going to add a few records in the meter list just so that we have some reference data. So we'll assign our first meter here. Call it main. It services a house. Location, we'll give it an address. And a multiplier, let's say 2. And we'll go ahead and submit that. Then we'll go ahead and add a second meter. Call this a sub basement 209. And we'll submit this. So now that we have 2 meters in our list, I'm going to go ahead and enter a meter here. So now that we have some, we should see some of these values look up. So here's our description, main, our service of house, and our location. We can also take a photo of this meter, which I'm just going to take a picture of my desk here. Okay, now that that's finished, we can go ahead and accept this image by clicking the green checkbox. We'll go ahead and hit next and enter our current reading. And if we had any notes, we could enter them here. I'm not going to enter any, then I'm just going to hit Save Data. So you'll notice, now that I'm submitting that record, since our filter of send email is matching, it pops up our messaging dialog. So at this point, you could actually modify some things before you send the email. You can actually change who it's going to, the report that you want to use, as well as which the records that you want to send, whether it be all records, current record, or where, which equates to this send what drop down over here of all records, current record, and prompt for filter. So this is where this send message automatically would tie in. So if I were to enable that, we would actually bypass this message dialog, basically just sending the email, not allowing the user to interact with this dialog to modify anything. So that's what that send message automatically would do. So I'm just going to send this message. So our record submits, and then we'll just wait for that message to appear in my inbox here. So we should see a flash of new mail. Okay, there it is. So if we look at the email, here's our subject of new meter read. Here's our data of 2014, our meter number, some of our descriptions, as well as our current read. So you'll see that this is a very basic format, and it will be something you'd want to change. One thing you'll notice also is that the image didn't come across. So that's something that we're going to have to configure when we modify this report. So I'm going to go ahead and close this email. And if I open to our location where our reports are saved, so that's going to be in the My Documents, TracerPlus desktop, System Info, and Messages. So if you happen to create a report on your own, you'd want to copy it to this folder here. And once you actually do that, if you have desktop open already, just click this refresh button, and it'll refresh this list to show your new report. Otherwise, if desktop's not open, you could just open it, and that report should show in that drop-down. Okay, so we're going to modify our sample here. So I'm going to open that with TextPad. You can use any text editor, whether it be the default Windows Notepad, TextPad, or Notepad Plus. There's some other text editors out there, but you can use the editor of your choice. So now that we look at this report, I'll explain some of the sections of it. So the first section in our format is the define vars, which is defining our variables. So this is telling basically what variables should be included in this report and what the source of those variables would be. So if I open up desktop again and we jump back to our field settings, maybe we want to make these variables make a little bit more sense. So if I were to actually name some of these instead of field name equals field 1, which you'll notice down here, this is where the actual variable is called out in the email. So this is some plain text as we saw, followed by the variable that's called out. So that's telling it to grab whatever data is in field 1 of TracerPlus. So rather than call it field 1, we can actually call this FY for the fiscal year. We'll call this meter. We'll call this one description, or DESC for short. We'll call this one service. Location. We'll call this one month. This will be our reading. And we don't need last reading or difference. Maybe we do, but in this case I'm not going to include it. Maybe we want some notes. Then we want the current date. And then we want our photo. So once you actually name variables up here, then you have to set which actual source field in TracerPlus they're coming from. So if we look at fiscal year, you'll see that that is field 1, noted by this number in the left column here of 1 through 16. So all this should line up until we get to the after reading. So if we look at notes, that's actually field 11. So we come over to the source field here and change this to 11. So that now knows to take the variable of notes and tie it to the source field of 11 in the session, which happens to be our notes field. We'll do the same for date, which is field 12. And then for photo, which is field 15. So I mentioned earlier that we had to make a change for that photo to come through. So this is where that type comes into play. So type right now is dB. This will just send the regular data. Since this is image data, we want to change this to a value of bin. So once we change this to bin, which is short for binary, that's actually going to send the image as an attachment in our email. So now that we come below, we have a page header here. So you can actually separate the report into different sections. So picture doing an order or some type of estimate, which I'll actually show later. You could actually have customer header information in the page header, and then maybe totaling information in the page footer. And then between the actual record tag would be all of the items that would be included on that order, which you can actually specify using this max records per page here, changing this to something other than 1. But I'll dive into that a little bit later when I talk about that advanced report. So for now, we're just going to delete what we have in our page header and our footer. And we'll just focus on the record at hand. So because we changed our variables up here, we now need to reference those same variables down here. So this will be our fiscal year. This will be our meter. This will be our description, our service, our location, month, our reading, our notes, date, and then finally we have the photo. So even though we're referencing the bin up here, we do still have to include this in the body of the email just so that it actually knows to call out that piece of data. You'll notice that each variable proceeds with a ASC tag. That's basically specifying a hex value of a line feed, which is that 0D. So now you'll see that why naming your variables would be easier for you, as it's easier for you to reference in the actual report to kind of know what information you want to go where, as opposed to the default field 1 through field 10. You would have to reference your project a lot just to see what those fields were. So that's why you'd want to rename those. The next thing we want to do is name our different text fields, or our text that precedes our actual data. So instead of field 1, we'll call this fiscal year. We'll do the same for field 2. This will be our meter number. This will be our description. Our main service. Our location. Have our current month. Our current reading. We'll just call that reading. Our notes fields. And we have our, maybe we'll call this read date. Field 10, this is our photo. So what I actually like to do with attachments, whether it be photo or signatures, is actually have a section called attachments. And I would probably actually copy this down to our page footer just to give it some separation. And I'll also carriage return so that shows underneath. So once we send the email, we'll see our data up here, followed by a few line feeds, and then our attachment of it'll basically tell us what we should be expecting as an attachment. So I'm just going to add a second line feed on our last field up in our record tag. So that will give us some extra spacing. Maybe another thing we want to do actually is move this date up to the footer, once again, to show some separation. So I'll add our extra line feed to our notes field now, and I'll copy this to our page header section. So it kind of gives our report a little bit of separation. Now what I want to do is save this. Now there are a few different ways to get this over to the device. I'm just going to do it quickly. Instead of having to update some of the desktop directories, I'm just going to copy it directly to my device. So if I browse my Pocket PC here, and we navigate to our My Documents, TracerPlus 8, System Info, and then Messages folder, I can then take this email sample report from our modified directory here and just drag that over to our device and replace the existing. So now if I bring up my device and I scan a second meter here, if I enter the correct meter. So here's our sub-meter. Once again, I'll take a different photo here, a little different angle of my desk. And we'll go ahead and accept this image. And if we hit next, we'll just capture our reading here. And we'll go ahead and save this. So I'll go ahead and send this. Okay, our record submitted. And we'll just wait for that email to come through. Should be coming through shortly. Okay, here's our new meter read. So if I slide this out of the way, you'll see that our report looks a little bit different now. You'll see that we have our attachment here. So here's our image attachment that's now coming over. And you'll see that we customize our report. You'll see that I probably did some things wrong here, as it didn't respect our extra line feeds here. So what I'm going to actually do is separate it with a break. So I'll do the same down here. So you'll see how we modify the report from the sample. So now the next thing I want to do is actually show you how you can control the subject of the email as well as the recipient on the device itself. So in most cases, we find that your recipient's not always going to be the same. Maybe instead of sending these meter reads to the office, maybe we want to send these to the customer instead. So each one's going to have their own email address. So you'll see how this setting here wouldn't work. So what I'm going to do is set that as a variable in our report. First, I'm going to remove it. The same as the subject. Let's say we want a custom subject that would include the meter number and maybe the date that it was being read. So if I clear those two out, we go ahead and add some extra fields to our sessions here. So first, I want to add an email address to our meter list. So this will be an email address we can look up when we actually scan the meter number, and we'll actually use that to send the email. So what we want to do here is add an email address field to our meter reading session. And we'll want to set this as a lookup field. So we're going to look in our meter list based on the meter number. And we're going to pull in that email address. We also want to change our subject. So what we can do is add a field for that as well. We'll call it subject. And what we can do here is actually do a string concatenation. So I'll set this as a field type of calculated. We'll leave it as a data type of general so it knows to do a string calculation instead of a numeric calculation. And now we can actually add what we want this subject to say. So maybe we'll say meter number, or actually maybe we'll call it reading of meter number, followed by a space and insert that. Then we can choose our meter number field. So this is going to start building a string of text for us for our subject. So after we enter our meter number, maybe we want to do an on date. So we'll do a space, on, and then space, insert that, and then lastly select our date field. So our subject should now consist of reading of meter number, the actual meter number on the current date. So I'm going to push this out to my device. So once I do that, now we want to modify our report again. So to speed things up, I'm actually just going to grab the variables we need from another report I have. So if we look at a different report here, there's two different variables we want to add here, our message subject and our message recipient. So if I just add those to my report that we modified here, and we'll just line that up. So these are the two variables that you're going to use so it knows to look for that subject as well as that recipient. One other thing we need to do, since putting it in the define vars section is not enough alone, as we need to call it out in the actual email itself, I also need to copy these two lines of code here, basically calling out those variables, but since we don't actually want to print them in the email body, we have a setting called disabled print where it equals 1 for true. So even though we're calling this out in the body, we're disabling the print so it's not actually included in the body email. So I'm just going to close that other sample. And if we come back to desktop, you'll notice that we have to define our sources here to match our subject and recipients. So if we look at our subject, that's field 18. So we're going to change this to field 18. And then our email address or recipient is field 17. So now once we send an email, it's going to look to field 17 for our email recipient, and then it's going to look to field 18 for the subject of our message. So I'm just going to save this, and then we'll copy that over to our device again. So I bring up our email sample, and we still have our device open. I'm just going to slide this over again, and we'll replace the existing. So now what we want to do is actually add some email addresses to our source data. So I'm going to go to our meter list. We'll go to our view data, meter list, and I'll go ahead and edit these records. Yep. So one other thing we forgot to do is actually add our email field to our session here. So if we jump back over to meter list, and we go ahead and add a field to our form, we'll go ahead and change this to email address, and we'll redeploy that. So since I'm deploying this project again, it's just going to take our default email report and push it back to the device. So since I haven't actually tied our new email report to our project, I just need to copy this over to our device again. So after I'm finished with this, I'll show you what you need to do to actually tie your new report to your desktop project. So once again, if we go to View Data and edit our record here, we now have our field where we can enter an email address. So I'll enter my TracerPlus email as before for the first meter. And then for the second meter, I'll add another one of my email addresses that's at our Clearstream site. So just a shameless plug there. If you're interested in fixed RFID, we recommend you take a look at our Clearstream product. So that's clearstreamrfid.com. So I'll just submit that. And now if I were to jump back to our meter reading, and let's go ahead and scan that meter again. Oh, let me scan a valid meter. So we'll take a photo again. Okay, we'll go ahead and accept our photo. And we'll enter our reading. One thing you'll notice now, since we had a meter reading from one of our previous records, we actually have a last reading value now. So you'll see how that kind of ties in with this application. As I enter a new reading, it actually calculates a difference for you. Okay, so if I hit my Save Data, so you'll notice now we don't have anything in the to fields, so we're just going to hit Send. So our record's submitted, and that data should start coming over. Okay, it should pop up any minute. Okay, so here's our new read. So now you'll notice, so we still got our email to my TracerPlus email address here, but you'll notice that the subject is now taking from the data that we entered. So here's our reading of meter number. Here's the meter number I just entered. And then here's our current date that we submitted that record at. You'll see our extra spacing now that I put those BR tags. And then once again, there's our image. So now if I were to send an email from our second meter, you'll see that that's actually going to go to our second email address. And I'll take a different angle of my desk here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and accept this photo. Enter a new reading. And we'll just put something in the notes field just to show you come over. Oops. Now I actually jumped the gun there. I hit Save Data. Ended up clicking it twice and ended up canceling our email. So one other thing we can do, or another way to send email, is to come to our View Data, go to our File menu, and then hit Message. So once again, that'll pop up our familiar message dialog, and then we can just hit Send. And while we wait for that to come over, one other way to send that email is to add a button action to your form. Up there. I actually entered my Clearstream email incorrectly on that one. So here's the email that we were intending to send, but I had my email address entered wrong. I spelled my name EA instead of AE. But you'll see that it tried to send it to that different email address. Here's our subject that has the that particular meter number that we just inspected. along with a different date from our first email. So we still have our attachment and all of our email data below here. So as I was saying before, the third method of actually sending an email is by adding a button action to the form. So if we go to meter reading, and we go to our last page, there's not really room here, so maybe I'll add it to our first page. But if we click on button and we place that on the form, let's put it up here, and we were to name that email, we can then change this to a button action of send message. So by doing that, if I were to deploy this, we should now see, once we go into that meter reading session, we should see this button and then actually be able to send an email that way. So that pops up our message dialog. So I could actually send, maybe we'll do a where, meter number, and then we can do a 10002, and then hit send. So that actually is probably not going to send. Being that I deployed our project, it overwrote whatever email sample we had in there. So the way to actually include this with the desktop project, let me close my report here. So if we take this email sample and then copy it to our project directory. So if we look at our project, we'll see our project name is meter reading, and then we can see where it's actually located. So if we navigate to projects, meter reading, and then if we go to our project files, system info messages, we'll copy it there. And just to be safe, I also like to copy it to our deploy folder. And if we jump back over to our meter reading, our messaging, we'll just refresh this list, and we'll reselect that report and then deploy it. Okay, so now if we try to send email again, so we'll do our where meter number equals 10102, and we send that, it should come over now. Okay, so you'll see since we actually had two records that match this value, you'll see how that would actually behave in this instance. So since we only had, if we open that, go back to my messaging directory here. Since we had a max records per page of 1, you'll notice this is how it would treat multiple rows sent in the same email. So it would just separate them. You'll see the first record here, second record here, and it would attach, both attachments to the email. So before we dive into our advanced sample here, just want to talk about if you did switch to SMS, your recipients would be set to the phone number or the contact you're sending it to, and then the same can be said of the subject. if you wanted to have a subject or not. But the report itself would be similar. You would probably have less information, as you're not going to send that much information in a text as opposed to an email. Okay, so here's a sample. I'm not actually going to show it on the device, but I'll compare the actual email to the report. So if we open up our estimate sample here, so you'll see how this is laid out differently. This is actually 3 records sent in a single email. So you'll see how that's laid out differently already compared to the 2 records we just sent in the previous email. So that's where we control this max records per page is going to include the record information. So whatever in this record tag here, so if you set this to something other than 1, it's going to treat this record tag as basically one section. So you'll see here, this was actually 3 records. Each of these records actually had all of this information above and below here, but we were actually printing based on an account number of 11568. So it took these 3 data records or 3 items that we entered for this estimate and grouped them together in this record section here. So if we actually look at this, you'll see our var name of AC, which is account code, followed by the quantity, followed by a description, the time, which is in minutes, I believe. This was actually an HVAC company doing estimates on site. So they were taking customer information and then sending it back to the office as an estimate. So that was actually time that would be spent on this particular description, the price, and then the total amount, or the sum total. So you'll see how those, so here's our account code, here's our quantity, our description, our time, price, and amount. So now you're probably wondering, how did you get this to space out so nicely? That's where these format strings come into play. So you'll see our variables here. These are the ones that are called out below. So here's our AC, our quantity, description, time, price, and amount. So you'll see we actually use format strings here that would pad the data so that it lines up nicely. So for the first one, we included a format string of 13 spaces. Then the next one, 7 spaces. The description, we're padding at 35. The time, 6. And then both the price and amount are padded 13 spaces. Now, depending on your email client, this may work differently. This may actually pad out nicely like I've shown here, or it could be a little scattered based on the mail client you're being used. One other thing you'll notice here are calculations. So we can actually do calculations during the actual email process. So we can take data that's sent to the email report and actually calculate that and put as a total at the bottom section of the email. So as you see here, we took these 3 amounts and we actually added them up to come up with a total of that 1548. So that's done with a sum total variable. We're actually taking the var name of amount and basically adding it to itself. So we called this sum total. So you'll see that we're adding it to itself as well as this amount variable. So that's how we can do calculations in this type of report. You'll also notice a bunch of ASC tags here calling out a 20. So that's another way that you can kind of space items in your report. The 20 is hex for a space character. So you can kind of play with your spacing as you send emails and kind of line it up accordingly. So that's our advanced report and what's possible. I'm not going to dive too much into it as it could get a little confusing off the bat. But you could actually jump over to our TracerPlus site, and if we look at our knowledge base, just so you know, our messaging function is very similar to our printing function. That instead of printing to a printer, it's just sending to an email. So a lot of the printing documentation applies to the messaging. So if you were actually to look at our user guide here, if I can find it, our print plugin guide. So we have our TracerPlus print plugin guide. That's going to actually explain what some of the different tags are used for, kind of how it's laid out. So if we so you'll see here it explains some of the settings. But if we jump down to the actual print format, this similar stuff would actually apply to the messaging format. So this may be a good reference for you. So you'll see how it breaks out the different tags in our report, the defined variables, the actual format string I was talking about before for spacing. It goes into that. Max records per page. Talks about some of those ASC tags. We have an advanced format in here that shows you an actual calculation that you could reference. This is kind of an invoice format that we've included in here. So this could actually apply to an email format as well. So you can access that from our support knowledge base, and then the printing with mobile printing with TracerPlus. For those of you who find this a little bit difficult or don't have the time, we do offer a service as well to actually allow us to create the format for you, and then we'll just send you that desktop project back, and then you'll be able to send that without doing any work. So that's all I wanted to cover today. I hope this was helpful for you and makes you want to go out and use email with TracerPlus. So if you do happen to have any questions after this webinar, once again, feel free to browse our TracerPlus.com support area. This video is being recorded and will be posted probably later today, so you can reference this for future use. If you have any questions, email us at sales@TracerPlus.com or give us a call. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and there's some interesting discussions going on at LinkedIn, so that may also be of some use to you. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I hope you got what you were expecting out of it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.